Hi everyone. On behalf of Delta's CHP and Distributed Power Service team, welcome to our webinar entitled Highlights from our Global Gas Engine Market Statistics Report. And this webinar will focus on the regional findings of this report. Silvestros and I will be your presenters for today. But first, a few quick housekeeping rules. So the webinar should take approximately 30 minutes in total, including 5 minutes at the end for answering questions. If you can't watch the entire webinar, that's entirely okay. It is being recorded and will be accessible online from next week onwards. At any stage during the webinar, feel free to type your questions using the text box on your screen, so that should be visible, and we'll answer as many as we can at the end. But if we run out of time, don't worry, I'll send an email afterwards with our comments and answers to the remaining questions. So the agenda for this webinar has been segmented as follows. We will begin with a short introduction to Delta or Delta EE, followed by our view of the global gas engine market. So this is specifically for stationary power generation. So we're not going to talk about sort of marine applications or compression applications. So this is stationary power generation, and the distributed power service focuses on engines sized 400 kilowatts and above. So all the way up to the 20 megawatt Wärtsilä MAN diesel and turbo type engines. We'll break this down, this view, by different regions. So there'll be Europe, and in our case here, we include Russia and Turkey in Europe, North America, South Asia, and it goes on. I'll describe this in greater detail later. We will also touch on Delta EE's distributed power service, where a lot of the data and research showcased today comes from. And finally, we're happy to take on any questions you may have at the end. So, Delta EE is a research consultancy specializing in heat and decentralized energy markets. We help our clients navigate the transformation of the energy system. So we provide market data and forecasts to strategic advice. Our client groups are primarily technology providers and energy utilities, but we also support a number of policymakers and financial institutions and other stakeholders in the energy system. So how do we support our clients? So this can be in the form of subscription-based research services or multi-client studies, or it can be through bespoke consultancy, answering very specific questions relevant to the client. Now, while Delta itself covers many aspects of the energy system, as portrayed in the sort of gray-orange bubble diagram on your screen, Silvestros and I are part of the CHP and distributed power team. So let's begin with our view of the global gas engine market. So Delta expects the gas engine market. So again, just to be clear, it's stationary power generation above 400 kilowatts. Yeah, so we expect this market to grow from around 6.3 gigawatts in 2017 to over 7.4 gigawatts by 2022. In 2015, actually, this was around 4.9 gigawatts, so it was down. There was a dip in 2015 from about 5.4 gigawatts in 2014. But we're happy to report in this webinar that 2016 and 2017 saw the market recover, so that's good news for all. And we'll discuss how this translates by regions. But first, how does Delta segment its regions for the distributed power service? So we have 6 regions, as color indicated on the map. So gray is North America, sort of orange peach is Europe, which includes Russia and Turkey. East Asia is blue. South Asia, Southeast Asia, and all the way down to the Pacific is purple. Then brown is Africa and Middle East, sort of lumped together. And then we got green, which is South America. So how did these regions compare to each other? So regionally, it is actually Europe, which is clearly the #1 region in the world for gas engines for stationary power generations. It has an annual installed capacity of approximately 2 gigawatt in 2017. Now, the region suffered a bit of a blow, just now I mentioned it briefly, in 2015 and 2016, as Germany, Russia, and Turkey each suffered various market barriers, at the same time. But growth looks back on track. North America is second, with South Asia, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific, again lumped as a category, third in terms of regional installations. And just a quick mention on the East Asia region. So it's set to almost double in size during the next 5 years, with most growth coming from China. As you can see at the bottom, so we've aggregated here all our engines into one big blue bar, but actually at the bottom in the actual research, we segment this by size band. So we segment it by 400 kilowatt to 1 megawatt, then 1 megawatt to 2, it goes on all the way to about 10 to 20 megawatts. And you can't see it here because we've aggregated it, but in terms of size bands, so where there's more opportunity for each size band, this differs per region and application. So for example, the 400 kilowatt to 2 megawatt size bands, especially in CHP applications, are most dominant in Europe, whilst distributed power only applications for the 400 kilowatt to 2 megawatt size bands are dominant in emerging markets where energy demand is increasing and power shortages are common. So larger engines, so if you'd say, let's say 5 megawatts and above, are more common in Europe and North America across industrial sites, district heating schemes, and in line with the ongoing trend towards more flexible and large distributed gas-fired power plants. So let's discuss each region a little bit in more detail. So I'll start with Europe. So as mentioned, it's the world's largest global region for reciprocating gas engine sales and will likely stay that way to the period 2022. Germany is by far the largest market today, and actually the only European country with an average annual installed capacity of larger than 400 megawatts between 2014 to 2017. So every year it managed to sustain that amount of installations, though a dip in 2016 was witnessed where it came down slightly to about 350. It actually enjoys over 30% market share in the 400 kilowatt to 5 megawatt size band. It's got a fantastic CHP market, and that's why it has that sort of market share. Now I'll just talk about UK for a second. So it's a top 5 European market, and it had an annual installed capacity of around 190 megawatts in 2016, so roughly about there. But going forward, and we're already seeing this, the UK market is likely to see about 400 to 800 megawatts per year in 2017 to 2019, thanks to a newly introduced capacity market, which is a key pillar of the UK's electricity market reforms. So there'll be a sort of spike for the next few years, thanks to this capacity market. I mean, we won't touch on this in this webinar, but we definitely will be monitoring the progress of Brexit and its implications in 2018. I mean, overall, the other top countries in this region include Russia, Turkey, and France. So Turkey has faced a number of challenges. I just will talk a little bit about Turkey and France. So some of you might be thinking, right, Turkey faced a number of challenges in recent years with respect to gas engine sales, including government instability and a weak Turkish lira. So that's the currency. But as a result, so of course, Turkey's gas engine sales had dropped considerably in 2016. But we expect a recovering market in the second half of the decade. And actually, that's already been witnessed in 2017. So things are looking better in Turkey. But I'll move on to North America, and I'll let my colleague Silvestros talk about that region a little bit more.
Thank you, Dina. And yeah, I'll continue on with our second region, North America. And I'll start with what may seem as an obvious observation is that this region is dominated by the US. Over 75% of all North American sales come from the US market. Now, not only this, but the US market is currently the #1 market in the world in terms of annual installed capacity, and will likely remain so up to 2022. So, in other words, it has the highest yearly installed capacity compared to any other country in the world, beating China and Germany, the two other major markets. Its growth potential comes from both the sub 5 megawatt size bands and the larger than 5 megawatt size class. And in terms of applications, in both CHP and power-only application. The reason for this potential is the following. Booming shale gas supply and the resulting low natural gas prices in the past few years. We expect that going forward, the healthy spark spreads will continue up to 2022, with some states still experiencing electricity prices that are 4 or 5 times more than that of the gas price. Another key driver for the US is policy. Strict federal environmental regulation to cut down greenhouse gas emissions is a first example, although we see it weakening under the current administration of Donald Trump. Another example is federal CHP tax credit, state-specific energy efficiency and renewables incentive mechanisms, and overall support to encourage power supply hedges in a blackout-prone USA. We also see greater demand for flexible generation. This will mostly benefit the larger gas engines. Now, in terms of the rest countries in the region, Canada, for example, represents 18% of the region's overall market share today, but will represent nearer to 12% in 2022. On the other hand, Mexico will likely represent at around 10% market share in 2022, going up from 5% currently. As energy market reforms open up for the power sector to private investors, and ambitious new targets for decarbonization will result in market dynamics which are favorable for gas engine sales.
Great, okay. So I'll talk now about the South Asia, Southeast Asia and Pacific region. I mean, it's clear we can split this into South Asia first, so it's easier to discuss things. So the South Asia market, I mean, the main driver for distributed power is the highly unreliable grid supply. But it's unfortunate, I mean, the region falls short of potential due to limited gas infrastructure or LNG terminals, and the possible rising of natural gas tariffs, which up to now have been heavily regulated. And this is quite a feature in markets including Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan. So it's a good market. It could have been better, but it falls short of potential. Now, in terms of Southeast Asia, it's a growing market with opportunities in both natural gas and biogas applications. So, for example, the palm oil sector is a key application here. Indonesia is the largest gas engine market today in this Southeast Asia region. Around 200, 300 megawatts are being installed every year, driven by the ramping up of construction of large power plants. This is government driven. And there's about roughly 1 gigawatt planned capacity specifically coming from engine-based plants. This growth will be aided by new gas supplies and gas infrastructure upgrades. Other factors include the gradual removal of diesel subsidies, increases in electricity prices to 2022, alongside Indonesia's poor and worsening, actually, security of supply. So all these present a strong opportunity for gas-fueled CHP. I'll mention Myanmar, actually, briefly, because despite having large gas reserves and its production increasing substantially over the last decade, Myanmar's infrastructure has remained undeveloped, or underdeveloped, actually, more likely. However, the removal of sanctions and increased FDI, so foreign direct investment, have gradually helped make Myanmar a decent gas engine market in its pursuit of reliable decentralized power. The other countries to mention are sort of Malaysia, Thailand, Singapore. There are a few opportunities in industrial sites, but there are also opportunities in biogas, especially in Malaysia and Thailand, driven by renewable policies and significant sources of fuel. So you've got sort of palm oil estates from municipal waste sites, etc. A few trigeneration opportunities where there's cooling may exist in commercial buildings in Singapore as well. And then lastly, for this region, I'll just talk about the Pacific. I mean, it's a small regional or sub-regional market today with opportunities primarily in Australia. So Australia currently is about, let's say, 50 megawatts per year type of market. And there are large opportunities present for gas engines using coal seam gas or coal bed methane. Most of the activity for tri-generation plants, so for cooling, will likely be in Sydney and other major cities, and we've already seen a few plants being installed there. But I mean, compared to the rest, it's a small market.
Okay, I'll continue on with our next region, Africa and the Middle East. And first of all, I want to start the discussion with the graph that we see on screen. Now, I want to point out that this diagram shows the aggregated installed capacity for the region. Actually, many countries experience a lot of fluctuations in terms of a good year and what we can say not so good or a bad year for gas engines. So in reality, what we see is that this region has a high dependence of occasional large projects. We're talking about projects that power plants that are larger than 100 megawatts, and these could be one-offs. So this is not easily captured by a diagram that is aggregate of all countries.
So by country, it would look a lot spikier than what is portrayed in the screen. But because we've aggregated it by all the engine size bands and by all the countries in this region, it looks more neater, more flatter than what it usually would be.
Mm-hmm. And as I said, since this region is dominated by large projects, the smaller engines have a small market share there, but we expect that to change going forward closer to 2022. But at the moment, especially the sub 1 megawatt projects are very uncommon and the market awareness is very low. If I had to pick up the key drivers for this market, I would say that number one is the poor electricity infrastructure. This region as a whole is characterized by an inadequate power system. This creates strong incentives for power-only and standby backup gas engine-based power plants in areas where there is already some sort of gas supply. Now, another driver is the growing production and availability of natural gas. Especially this is true for Africa, where technically it has 10% of the recoverable global gas reserves, but they have been barely started to being exploited. Finally, another strong driver is the strong spark spread that is evident in some countries. One example here is Nigeria, that has a spark spread of around 6. And also, let's not forget that there are decent macroeconomic and development prospects for this region overall going forward.
Great, okay. So moving on to East Asia. So let's start with China. I mean, it's easily the largest gas engine market in East Asia today, with coal mine or coal bed methane projects accounting for more than half of the Chinese annual installed capacity in recent years. The growth will likely come from increased activity within cogeneration or tri-generation developments, particularly in densely populated urban areas where air quality is increasingly a driver. And there's emerging policy support which will also bolster the market. There's actually quite a lot of strong local OEMs, original equipment manufacturer presence, and they're actively creating market push. So while you find your foreign sort of engine players present in China, actually the local manufacturers are quite prominent there as well. I'll talk a little bit about Japan because it's going forward going to grow quite a bit thanks to the energy market reforms. So similar to Mexico, this will be a good driver going forward in terms of market liberalization, pushing in particular the CHP sector. And in general, I mean, compared to the period 2008-2011, Japan's gas engine market has gradually recovered since then. It experienced a big collapse, had rising gas prices, had the economic slump impacting the industrial sector. So there was quite a dip for a while, but this has already recovered. So that's great. And like I said, going forward, will continue to grow. I'll just briefly mention Mongolia and South Korea as well, because they make up the rest of the countries in this region. So for Mongolia, the major opportunity for gas engine sales, we think at least, is associated with coal mine or methane projects. There's been no strong evidence actually to show significant uptake of existing coal mine projects, though we are aware of a small number of demo projects that's using quite small gas engine units. However, a number of these feasibility studies have been carried out and demonstrate great technical and economical potential. So the potential is there. So it is likely that there will be some modest activity observed by 2020, but unlikely to exceed the 10 megawatt per year. It'll be less than that. I mean, in general, so electricity demand is low in Mongolia. So just 1 gigawatt of total generating capacity is mainly supplied by like 7 coal-fired power plants. So, you know, compared to China and Japan, Mongolia is really small as a market. On South Korea, so district heating and cooling networks represent the greatest sector for potential activity for gas engines. A lot of them cover sort of 2 million households being connected, these networks. And this market is continuing to expand, especially for cooling. And with a number of densely populated cities, so landfill gas projects also continue to be a modest market for gas engines, with many projects exporting the heat to nearby district heating networks. Today, we sort of estimate that the total gas engine market in South Korea is in the low tens of megawatts per year. I think it's important to mention the competitive threat of fuel cells, so large or even small fuel cell projects with a lot of strong government support are increasingly a threat to gas engines and could conceivably result in falling gas engine sales going forward. But this is something to monitor as well in terms of the support or preference given to fuel cells. And we'll just move on now to our final region.
Yep, our last region is South America. I will go through this region basically highlighting some interesting and what we consider key countries there. We'll start off with the leader, if I might say, Brazil. Brazil represents the greatest gas engine share today, and with some strong growth prospects up to 2022. Which are mainly driven by improving spark spreads and security of supply fears. We expect it to remain so in the future. Another interesting country is Colombia. There we see that industrial applications such as mining, the food and drink industry, petrochemical industry provide the greatest opportunity for gas engine sales. The country's economy is still relatively buoyant at this point, and with plentiful gas supplies, because actually Colombia is a gas producer and is currently a net exporter of natural gas, plus modest to good spark spread and some small regulatory support for high efficiency technologies. Evidence suggests that Colombia will be a good market for gas engines in the period going forward. Argentina is another key country here, where the government is currently aiming to revamp flagging production at its massive shale reserves, and at the same time it is investing heavily in new power generation capacity to close the gas generation deficit. In the recent times, a number of large gas engine power plants have been installed in Argentina, especially so in the 2017. I'll go on with a bit of a surprise country, if I might say, El Salvador. Despite it being quite a small country, it will be hosting one of the largest gas engine projects in the next few years. More specifically, I'm talking about a larger than 300 megawatts power plant with Wärtsilä gas engines that is scheduled for completion in 2018. And this will naturally be in the plus 10 size band. Some of this capacity is expected to fall in the year 2017. Hence, as you can see in our graph, there is a spike there in 2017. It's largely because of this project as well. Now I'll close with the final country, Chile, which is a relatively liberal electricity market and also has some legislation to support small-scale renewable and high-efficiency generation. At the same time, LNG terminals and regasification plants are coming online to support possibly new gas-fired power plants. As a result, we see that Chile is a market with some modest growth prospects in the future, albeit from an annual installed base of low tens megawatts currently.
Great. Okay, so that covers the 6 regions and some highlights on the countries as well. So all the findings discussed so far comes from our distributed power service, and as of January 2018, we have produced 23 in-depth gas engine market reports. So again, just to confirm, it's gas engines focused on stationary power applications above 400 kilowatt, though we do other ranges as well, but that's more within the bespoke consultancy. The 23 countries can range from Australia, Argentina, all the way to UK, USA. And the reason we've chosen these 23 countries is a mixture of it, including some countries which are already healthy or matured markets, so it's a good market today already, or some countries which are sort of okay markets currently, but showing tons of growth potential in the future. All countries where our subscribers are either active or are planning to enter, so they just want to understand these markets a little bit better. We've also done 2 regional reports on the dual fuel engine markets, focusing on South Asia Pacific as well as South America. And in terms of what else to expect this year, well, for 2018, we have just published our annual Global Gas Engine Market Statistics report. So that's the one we're discussing today on this webinar and is available for standalone purchase. We will also be producing an applications report. So you notice a lot of our work prior to this focuses on sales, so whether it's number of units or annual installed capacity. But here we are trying to move slightly away from that and focus a little bit on the end use application. So across a wide number of countries, where are the larger than 5 megawatt engines most likely to have its best opportunities for peaking, or where is it a data center applications market, or where is it CHP and energy services market. So depending on the size range, different demands from the markets, these applications report will give you an idea. We will also be covering a number of high-level country reports. So these are Malaysia, Myanmar, Spain, Hungary, Romania, Belgium, Netherlands, and a number of CIS countries, so Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and a few others. And we also make it a point to always update our country reports. So this year we're aiming to do France, Italy, Indonesia, Japan, Russia, Nigeria, Brazil, and Germany. But we, as I mentioned, will keep an eye out for any other changes that might affect the sales forecast for any of the other countries throughout the year. Which brings us to a close. I can see a few questions coming in, so I'm just going to give you another quick 5 seconds. Sorry about how short a time it is, but thank you for sending those questions through. I will endeavor to reply as soon as possible. I'll take this one actually. Okay. So the question is, what would you say is the top 10 countries globally for gas engines? Because you focus on regions, but what is it by country? Well, it would depend on the year. As I hope we conveyed properly today, sometimes some countries have quite a lot of fluctuations. Some are more steadier sales markets. It also depends on the size range, the size band. So some countries enjoy quite a lot of steady growth within certain size bands. Some don't. They have more fluctuations. But if I had to choose off the top of my head, some of the sort of 10 to 15 top markets currently in terms of annual installed capacity. So number 1 would be USA, China, Germany. So they're in the top 3. Then you have UK, Russia, Brazil, let's say Indonesia, Japan, Turkey, Iran. I would lump also Canada, Italy, Mexico, Bangladesh, France, and India within this sort of top markets. And as mentioned, it will depend on the year as well. So if you remember during the Europe slide, I mentioned that UK is currently going through a big spike due to the capacity market. So UK is, number 4, I would say, currently, and going forward, at least till 2020, but might not always be the case going forward, nearer to 2030. So in short, those are the top 10 to 15 countries. But I would love to answer that in a more comprehensive manner via email. And that's all the time we have for this webinar today. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to more questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye.